I always tell people, if you don't influence the decision criteria or the requirements, you're selling on price. Somebody else has done that for you.
Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Revenue Architects. This podcast is tailored for revenue leaders navigating the evolving landscape of sales, RevOps, and revenue management. Today, we have a special guest, Chuck Pledger, author of The Elite Seller and VP of Revenue Performance at Veracode, a global leader in application risk management that builds and maintains secure software from code creation to cloud deployment. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Welcome,
Thanks,
Chuck.
Steve. Great. Jay, good to meet you guys and talk to you guys.
Chuck, why don't
go
you give
ahead.
a quick introduction about yourself and then we can jump right into the conversation.
I'd love to. Instead of going through my whole history and career and all that, let me just share one thing. This is what I really like people to know about me. I'm in this business because I love making an impact on those around me. It's actually my life mission. It's what I really have focused on all throughout my career is how do I make a positive impact on those around me? And so all throughout my career in sales and as an engineer and the different roles I've had, that's really been my focus is making an impact. And I'll share a little bit later on of why I came to that. I judge success not by titles now and not by how much money I make, although they're important. But I really judge my success on how many people have I helped, the new sellers coming into the market, the new sales leaders. How many have I helped succeed and seen them improve and take the next steps in their career, move forward in career? So that's what I like people to know about me. For me, it's about making a legacy for the next generation.
Love that. I think there's this thing I saw when you turn 50, you work towards success and then you work towards significance. You may do a lot of the same things, but there's a very different intention in being able to go, okay, now that I've crossed this potential mid-mark, what am I going to do with this and how do I
Right.
move it? So I love that
Right.
about the way you put that together. So let's jump right in. In our previous conversation, you talked about how, as we always start our conversations here with forecasting, and you always talk about how forecasting has really evolved from a reporting exercise into something much more operational, especially with the pressure on pipeline clarity and productivity. With it, SKOs finalizing and scorecards under review, can you define your matrix for how you manage forecasting?
Yeah, so I look at forecasting maybe a little bit differently than others. To me, forecasting starts not when all the deals are lined up and you're just magically picking which ones. There's risk related to that. But I'm an engineer at heart. My background is engineering, so I think like an engineer, although I've been in sales the majority of my career now. But I think in terms of frameworks. And so when I think of forecasting, I think in lines of what are the things that have to happen for this deal to be qualified. And so to forecast a deal, it starts with the discovery. You have to ask the right questions. I look at it as a quadrant. There's two matrices. The vertical axis, I look at as urgency. And what drives urgency is pain. It's the business impact of pain. And you divide the quadrant up in the top half and bottom half with that. So again, I use MEDDPICC. If you think about the I in MEDDPICC, that's pain. It's identify, indicate, and implicate. Most people think the I in MEDDPICC is just identify. You can identify a ton of pain. It doesn't mean a deal is going to close. It doesn't mean a deal is even going to move. And the dividing line I look at for forecasting is, have you qualified or quantified how big and how bloody that pain is in terms of risk, revenue, and cost? I was actually just yesterday looking through a couple of opportunities here. And one of the opportunities under pain in our CRM is that they've got 100,000 issues that they've identified as far as security tech debt. I'm like, okay, that doesn't mean anything. What does it mean to us? What does it mean to the customer? But then I started asking questions about it. Okay, think about that. If it's 100,000 issues, how long does it take you to solve each issue? And they're like, it's 8 hours. That's 800,000 man hours, right?
Oh.
I hadn't thought of that. What is that? 800,000 divided by roughly 370, 380 man years. So that's a big problem. So when you start to quantify how big the problem is, then you're going to realize how fast is this going to move? And so that dividing line, if I don't see a rep that has identified and quantified how big and how bloody the problem is, that deal's not moving. The other axis, the x-axis, I look at from the perspective of how effective has the salesperson been in that opportunity. Again, using MEDDPICC. Have they identified a champion and built a champion? Have they validated and tested that champion? What I hear all the time, I can call this person over the weekend, they'll answer me. I'm like, that's not a champion. If you're going to have a champion, they have to be selling for you. They have to be vested in the deal. They have to have access to power and influence. And if they don't do any of those three things, they're not a champion. Yeah. And that's just the basics of MEDDPICC, right? But how effective have I been at enabling that champion? Have I gotten to the economic buyer? Have I influenced the decision criteria? I always tell people, if you don't influence the decision criteria or the requirements, you're selling on price. Somebody else has done that for you. So your best you're going to do is sell on price. So how effective have I been in managing those things? And when I take the pain axis, the urgency axis, and overlay that with how effective I've been, it creates 4 quadrants. I call that bottom left quadrant, it's the death zone. If I stay there too long, that's where everything starts, in that death zone. But if you stay there, it's not an opportunity. Get it out of your pipeline. So you've got low pain and no influence. If I go to the right, I've got lots of friends. They like me. I've done really well internally, but there's no pain. I call that the friend zone. You can stay there. They're going to test it. They're going to kick the tires.
Sure.
But if you're ever going to sell anything, you're going to have to give it away. Or you've got to figure out, how do I find the biggest pain so I can move up above the line? Top left is what I call the penalty zone, or oftentimes I'll call it late to the game. There they've got pain, but somebody else has already influenced it. So again, to change the game, you've got to get to the right people. It's classic late to the game. Filling an RFP, salespeople think, oh, this is great. I've got this opportunity. It's an RFP. You have no influence. So how do you change the game? Where you want to be is in that top right, where you've got a lot of pain and you've got great influence. That's where you can forecast a deal. You know for a fact that they're going to do something, and you've influenced the decision criteria. You've got a lot of control. Those are the deals that can be easily forecasted. Now, the rest of them, there's more risk, but that's the framework I look at when I look at a deal. And it's really easy to group them into one of those 4 categories. Just a few questions. A deal review call. Salespeople, they're optimistic. They think they can close the deal. But you and I, sitting in an opportunity with no feelings and no investment in that opportunity, we can look at it really easily and say, yeah, that deal doesn't have legs, at least not yet. So that's how I look at them. The other thing tied to that, we don't talk about this as much, but tied to that is, which deals should I be working on? And again, that's why I love that deal strategy matrix. If I'm spending all the time on these deals that I know we're never going to close, I'm not spending time on the ones that I know can close. And so you look at salespeople, they've got pipelines of 4 and 5x. And when the quarter closes, the year closes, they still don't hit their number. It's a huge problem with that. They're working all this volume, but they're not working in the stuff that's going to close. So that, at a high level, is how I look at forecasting.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I loved your idea of having a quadrant, because long time ago, we built something called a sales intelligence framework. Okay. And in that, we took our entire pipeline and plot it as a magic quadrant, taking the same concept of Gartner.
Yeah.
And same, you need to be on the right top corner, and you need to work on those deals because those have high probability to sell, because you have good relationships and there is a good pay that has matched. You just put a very nice perspective to the first box, which is a dead zone, you call it. The right box, where it is a friend zone, you call it that, oh, everybody's friendly with you, but there is no pain. So if you want to sell something, you literally have to give away. They are not going to pay for it. And the right, which is, I think, most insightful, where everybody falls in that trap, is the penalty zone, what you call, where RFPs come in, or you get invited to the party late just because they want an additional quote for their board to sign off on the vendor they have already pre-selected. So it is, I think, excellent way you put it. I really love that concept.
Yeah. I had a vendor selling to me a while back, and they were pushing in this deal. They were trying to do an expansion and get a lot more out of the deal. And I was trying to decrease the amount of money that we're spending and cut back. And he was trying to sell us a product, a function that I didn't need. And so he actually brought his president, basically his CRO on the line, was walking through and thinking, okay, we're going to close this deal today. But I actually brought up the matrix and I said, where do you think we're at in this matrix? Here's what you've done so far. Where would you put yourself in this matrix? And he's like, oh, no, I'd have to step back and think about it. But his manager, the president's like, oh, no, I know exactly where you're in the friend zone, which he was spot on. So it's easy when you look at the deals, it's easy to put it in that matrix. Even if you're not scoring MEDDPICC, you can still say, that's where I'm at, just intuitively.
I always used to call it, you have champions and then you have effective champions. They look the same at the beginning, but you have to test that champion to see if they're effective at the influence, moving the ball. Yeah, I really love this. I want to take it forward. Can't get a meeting with my CFO or whatever. And you're like, okay, as much as we like each other, in friend zone we're not actually moving the needle because there's not enough influence or enough pain for them to be paying attention to it.
Speaking of champions, everybody's like, I have to have a champion. The reality is, no, you need multiple champions. You need a business champion. You need a technical champion. The more champions you have, the better off you are, because that makes it easier for the economic buyer to make a decision. But the concept of champion, I think, is so misunderstood in MEDDPICC.
Yeah.
This is so awesome. I think you have spent your career sitting right at the intersection of enablement and performance. And one thing that stood out from our last conversation, the focus of making systems actually work, right, for sellers. So my question is, give us your insights on how do you see the best methods for bridging this gap between revenue ops and the field to achieve faster sales cycles, improved win rates, attending the quota, things like that.
Yeah. If I had a magic answer for that, I'd be really rich. But let me show you how I look at this. This is actually something I'm working on right now, and I call it scorecards. How are we measuring our salespeople? Because at the end of the day, you can look at win rates, you can look at sales cycles, quota attainment, all that stuff. But what I'm really looking for is how do I make them successful at the beginning? And so I break it down into 4 areas. I break it down into capability. In other words, from the seller's perspective, this is the enablement piece of it. How much do they know about the market and our product? How much do they know about our competitors and our sales methodology, value selling, whatever framework that you're using, right? Do they know the tools and process? Can they do objection handling? All that. That falls under capability. And I'm in the space of cybersecurity. That changes dramatically very quickly. And I think probably for everybody today, it's changing very rapidly. So capability is the first quadrant I look at from a success measurement, or readiness, if you want to look at it that way. The next block I really look at is execution. Are they engaged with the partners? How frequently are they engaging? How much engagement do they have with the customer? A lot of times what I see with salespeople, they'll have that one person they engage with, and that's my person, they're my champion, they brought me in, and I don't go up, I don't go down, I don't expand my relationship, so I'm single-threaded. So the customer engagement, have I expanded my relationships? Do I know other people? Are they running the sales or have adopted the sales plays? Process discipline would come under execution. Are they creating close plans? Are they creating account plans? Are they managing the other processes? So it's capability, execution. Those are critical. And that's where tools come in and can really help us understand, do they have those? The next 2 are easier to measure, but just as important is its pipeline. So if I want to really understand win rates and improve win rates and all those things, I've got to have a strong pipeline. But again, like I was saying earlier, I've seen salespeople with a 5x pipeline that still don't hit their number. So it's not only about the pipeline, it's about the quality of that pipeline. That's hard to measure. And that's something that we're digging into now, actually using AI tools and other things. Is each deal, is it qualified? Or it's part of your KPIs, or you're not getting paid. And we don't go to that level here, but I see that all the time as part of the KPIs. You have to maintain this level of pipeline. They have a great pipeline, but nothing in it is real. And so the quality of the pipeline is really important. So we measure that. The stage conversion, how quickly are they going from one stage to the other? A lot of people measure activity, and granted, activity is important. Activity leads to deals, to opportunities, leads to closing, right? But I could care less if a seller is doing 100 meetings a week or 10 meetings a week. What I care about are conversions, and are those deals real? I'd rather have them working on fewer deals that they know are going to close versus 20 deals that they're trying to manage and figure out, how do I get one of these to close? So again, it's how you manage your pipeline that's really important. And the hygiene of that is also really important. Am I keeping my notes in the CRM? Everything that I take, do I keep it there so that I can pull that information later to use it to help me understand where am I at in this deal? And then the last thing we look at is revenue. This is the trailing indicator, right? Did my person hit quota? What was their win rates? How do we affect the win rates? Let's go back and look at the other stuff. That's what's going to change the win rates. It's the capability and the execution, the pipeline. That affects win rates. It's my forecast accuracy. What kind of growth do they do? So again, I look at those four quadrants: capability, execution, pipeline, revenue. That's how I really look at my salespeople and my sales managers to figure out, are they being effective? How do I improve win rates? How do I improve their consistent attainment of quota? Again, it goes back to the basics and just doing the basic stuff really well. In today's society, we have more tools than we've ever had. We can measure everything, which is good and bad. But when you measure it, you've got to be looking at the right things and compensating your salespeople on the right things, or they'll build pipeline that never closes. So you've got to be looking at the right metrics. But having the tools and having the ability to look across the scorecard and say, this is where we're succeeding and not succeeding, that's really important.
We were talking to another CXO on a dinner a couple of days back, and he said, look at what happened. The technology has improved so much. And we were talking about tech stack and how many tools are there. He said, our life has become busier rather than becoming simpler with these tools. We are always connected, and sometimes we are getting so much confusing information that now we have to declutter it. But one question I had was, in your framework, where does the speed of qualifying, disqualifying a deal really fits? Because what I have also seen is, and to your point, I don't want to keep working on deal that will not close. But how do I figure that out? I can only figure it out if I can qualify, disqualify a deal, say maybe in 15 days versus taking 45 days, because then half of the quarter I'm just working on deals which may not even qualify. In your framework, where does that fit, and how does someone pinpoint?
To me, that ties back to cadence, and that's accountability. That comes back to the manager. Ultimately, it's in the salesperson to figure out, should I focus on this deal or not? You've got to look at it as an investment. I invest my time on these 3 deals or in these 15 deals. One of the things I see that happens is a seller, if they don't have enough pipeline, everything's a deal. Everything that moves becomes a deal. Where I think it's incumbent on the manager is to look at those deals, and depending on what stages you have, when we get to the stage that we call validation, there's a discovery stage, solution positioning, then we have validation. When we get to that validation stage, they had better know if it's a real deal or not at that point. And that's when I really expect our managers to start looking at those deals and saying, you know what, this isn't a real deal. You should move it out of the pipeline. But the best sellers that I've ever worked with, the elite sellers, they're not waiting for the manager to say this is a good deal or not. They're making the investment up front and saying, I want to invest here, or I don't want to invest here. And they'll look at the opportunity and they'll go into discovery call. And if it's a real meeting or a real opportunity, they'll jump on it. But if it's wishy-washy, their goal is to get rid of the deal as quickly as they can because they want to work on the stuff that's real. From the seller's perspective, as soon as I can get that deal out of my pipe, I look at it, should I disqualify this? And that's what I've always done in my career. I'm going to go talk to the customer or the prospect. I'm looking, how do I disqualify this deal? Because I know it's going to waste my time if I do multiple meetings, answer RFPs, and do all this stuff. I don't want to waste my time. I want to work in the deals that I know we're going to close.
I like the way you're approaching a deal, saying that, how do I disqualify this? So prove it to me, it is worth my time. Because the sales guy normally is very optimistic, right? So he's always saying that, how do I make it happen? That can be a trap versus convince me. So I'm going to go with an attitude saying that, how do I quickly disqualify this? But if I get right signals, then you convinced me and I'm going to continue investing in it. I think that's a very nice way of putting it.
Yeah. And also, I find when you talk to customers that way, they actually appreciate it. If you go in and tell them, you know what, we could do that, we could make that happen, and you might pay more for it. In the long run, you're going to be better off going with my competitor or this other company. This is where they have advantage. Oftentimes they'll do that really just to try to disqualify. You know what? We're going to be a lot harder to work with. If you're just looking for somebody that you can check the box and say we're compliant, that is not us. You don't want to use us for that because we're going to be harder to implement. But if you're looking to really make an impact and be able to impact risk and go to your board and say, this is what I've done and this is the impact I've made, then you want to look at us. But set it up front. And you'll find very quickly, you can disqualify people very quickly that most of us would waste 3, 4, 6 months on.
Yeah. I think you did mention something about the approach of tracking the right activities, making sure the sales team are doing the right activities, sales managers and other things. Now, a lot of that can be noise if you're not careful. It's easy as a leader not saying, I want to track all this. This is how people end up with terrible sales forces because they're like, just get a bunch of data. And you're like, what data is really driving revenue? And I think that's incumbent on leaders like yourself who are like, hey, how do we focus on building a strategy that we're not just tracking activity, we're actually driving revenue outcomes through those activities? And so how are you seeing companies blend this, moving out of being siloed in every department, figuring out each way to go into more of a comprehensive revenue strategy where it's actually focused on deal velocity and margin control? Because you can get a lot of deals with no profit.
Margin, yeah.
Yeah, we see a lot of growth companies that are like, put units on the board. And then eventually they're like, no, we actually need to make money. Yeah, we need to make money. How do you see that changing or evolving?
It varies depending on the type of company you're at. If you're in a startup, the goal is to put wins on the board. You're not as concerned about margin. I've seen that, and it's just run and gun, get as many closed deals as you can. When you get to companies like where I'm at, they're PE backed, and you have to be making a profit. That's when that becomes really important. Are we closing deals that have good margin in them? Or are we selling stuff that has zero margin? We've got products that we use as loss leaders almost. Or are we selling products that we know aren't going to make much more money for us, but it'll get us in the door with other stuff? There's different aspects of that, but that's a hard one. It just really comes down to managing your team and what the expectations are. I look at it from this perspective. Most sellers go into a deal thinking, okay, I've got to discount this deal. Customer just expects to discount the deal. But what I always tell my salespeople is if you go in and you sell on value, you don't have to discount the deal. When there's a lot of pain and you're solving a big problem for them, first of all, that's getting you to the economic buyer and the people that really care. And if you're solving a problem very quickly and it's a huge problem for them, you don't have to discount. So it's a mindset change, first of all. I remember, I won't tell you the company, but I was at another company a while back. I was an overlay salesperson. And the first meeting, the discovery call I went into, I was brought in with the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, half the C-suite. And it was because of an audit issue with our solution. They needed us to go in and help solve the problem. And so I bent over and I did everything I could to make this happen for them very quickly because it was going to cost them literally hundreds of millions of dollars if we didn't help them pass the next audit. So I was expecting PO to come in for, it was like 500,000, something like that. I gave them actually a good deal. When the PO came in, it was like less than 100,000. Went out to the rep. I'm like, what happened to the rest of this? He's like, oh, we always give them a discount. I'm like, are you nuts? So I think the biggest part of it is mindset. Are we telling our sellers to go out and do a year-end, quarter-end fire sale? Or are we truly telling them, you know what, we have tremendous value. If you lean into that value, you don't have to discount. You can actually mark it up and settle it above price, above list price. But that's not the mindset of most sellers today. Today, the mindset is, oh, I've got a discount.
Gotcha.
I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, it does. There's always a pressure, especially when it comes to figuring out people don't evolve a deal desk until they need a deal desk, right? So usually you grow and then you're like, oh, now we got to do some margin control, right? And the finance or leadership starts to pressure because they're like, well, we've raised all this money to get to this place, but now we're all of a sudden, we're still running negative. How long did Amazon go lose money? For like a decade? And then eventually, like, is it ever going to make money? And they're like, as soon as it did, it went crazy. But
it's never going to lose money now, right?
Yeah, but during those first 10 years, you got to really hang in. And so it's important to think the metrics tracking can drive sales teams to just hit numbers of units for tracking, but then they're not focused on those value things. As I said, they're like, I just need to get deal across the board. And they gave a $400,000 discount. And you're like, oh, you could have worked much less if you just said the value of this. If I'm saving you $100 million and I'm charging you only $500,000 to fix it, then they go, oh yeah, it doesn't matter.
Right.
That's absolutely right. Let's do this. The point is this the right value? You probably get charged $1 million or more.
Yep.
All right. And then in our previous conversation, you kind of highlighted how too much oversight can actually slow your teams down. So as you're trying to balance between accountability and enablement, when that becomes critical in defining the ownership, who should own this revenue execution? Like when you've seen this in organizations successfully untangle roles while driving collaboration across the revenue value chain. So like, how are you seeing companies while they start to add departments or add people to RevOps, to sales ops, to sales enablement, to all these things from the whole value chain? How are you seeing it entangled roles for a way to create more cohesive, all forward motion in a direction that leads to better revenue value?
Help me understand the question a little bit more. When you say who's owning,
So who owns this? So when it comes down to it, there's so many pieces now, and so many players involved in the revenue execution. There's RevOps, there's the VP of sales, there's customer success, there's CX, there's all these things, even down to the CMO trying to do demand gen. What are you seeing as a way to untangle some of those roles or get a hold of all of those roles going in all directions at once, trying to solve this revenue issue to drive more revenue? How are you seeing that being untangled in a way that allows everyone to have to do what they need to do in their specialties, but at the same time, really build a cohesive revenue strategy?
Yeah. So there's a lot to that question. At the end of the day, the only person that's going to drive revenue is the seller. And we look at it from the perspective of, we used to call them pods. We switched the name to integrated account team now, or just account team. But that account team has to be, if you're thinking of an existing account, it's going to be a customer success person, it's going to be the account manager, an engineer, or an SA. There's multiple people involved, channel person, that they're involved in that immediate customer facing activity. But in that group, there's got to be a quarterback. And to me, that quarterback is always the account manager. And you've got all the other people that are involved. You've got marketing, you've got my team, which is enablement or revenue performance. You've got revenue operations, where we're at. All these other teams that are involved peripherally. But at the end of the day, the person that really owns it is the account manager. If you're talking about land accounts, it's the same thing. You've got your business development or SDRs, BDRs. You've got those. You've got your SAs. You've got the account exec. You've got all those other people that come into that deal. But again, it's got to be the account exec that really says, this is the territory. I'm the quarterback. These are the accounts we're going after. This is why we're going after these accounts. And everybody has to be on the same board with that. Now, what I find is that you have to be really clear on expectations of the roles. In fact, one of the first things I do when I go to a company is I look at the roles and say, what are the definitions? What are the requirements for each role? What do they have to know from a capability perspective? So this is where my team comes in. What do they have to know from a capability perspective? What are their KPIs? How are they measured? How are they going to get paid, right? At the end of the day, what's the most important things, the high value activities that they need to be working on every single day? And for salespersons, to me, it's you've got to be building qualified pipeline, moving it through the funnel, closing it, and investing in yourself so you're more effective and more efficient at those first three. So you got to define that for each role. And that's when those roles work together. The other thing that's really important, this is the harder piece, is what are the handshakes between each role? So the account manager, this is my role. I'm going to do this. I'm going to hand it off to this person. And this is the expectation when you're working with them. When it goes to implementation, when it goes to all these, there has to be handoffs and feedback back and forth. And you have to be able to capture that somewhere. But the definition of those roles and the definition of that engagement model, that is so critical. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart.
Gotcha.
And you actually brought a very important point that really leads me to my exciting part of my job being a technologist is you made a very strong point that technology should reduce friction, give time back to sellers. You need to have these handoffs. And we also believe that technology is very critical in centralizing whole revenue system. My question to you is, how have you designed these Salesforce and AI, right? And a lot of other tools. How have you designed all of that modern tech stack, as we call it in today's world, to enable these sales teams to drive better outcomes?
This is both something I love right now and something I hate right now.
Okay.
One of the things that is most important to me, it's one of my foundations or principles that I live by with in enablement, is I can't be part of the noise. If I'm part of the noise, if I'm asking the sellers to do stuff that keeps them from selling, they're not going to pay attention to me. I've got to provide value to them. So a problem with all the tools that we have is a lot of sellers look at them as noise. In our environment here, we've got a CRM, we're using Salesforce. We happen to be using Clary and all the Clary tools that come with that. We're using Outreach, we're using Sixth Sense. We have so many tools available to our team. LinkedIn Navigator, Zoom Info, a ton of tools. I could have them busy all day long just updating tools and using tools.
Yeah.
In fact, I know they probably feel like that. And it's not only the tools, it's the processes. So because of the tools, we want you to update the account plan, the account strategy, or the close plan, or all these things. So it's the processes on top of the tools. And what happens, the salespeople don't like doing it. So they put it off, then it becomes a fire drill. Okay, everybody's got to have this done by the end of next week. And what happens, they're like, okay, I'll stop selling. The reality is they should be using the tools for their own good. So I think it's probably on us that we haven't sold it effectively, because the best sellers in the world, they automatically update the tools because it helps them become better. But what I'm finding today is because we've got so many, I call them signals. We've got so many signals all over the place. If they're actually putting stuff in, we can pull the information out of the call recordings. We can pull information out of our CSM system and out of Salesforce and all the other tools that we have. We can actually show them, here's the gaps that you have in this account, or here's the sales strategy that you should be running here. We can look at external information, pull all that in. And so instead of using the tools and punishing them by saying, oh, you haven't done this stuff, let's use the tools in a positive way, pull it all into something that actually makes sense for them individually, not say, everybody, you should be doing this. Steve, for your account, the one that you're focused on, here's a lot of the external things that they're dealing with that came out of their annual reports. And this is the news that we're seeing. And here's the things that we're seeing from the meetings that you have. Here's the gaps you have. You've only met with these 3 people, but here's all these other people that you should be meeting with. All that information is actually available and can be pulled out and sourced and handed to our sellers. But if we hand it to them, oh, here's your sales strategy, they won't use it. But if you hand it to them and say, here's a coaching guide, here's something that all the stuff that you've been collecting, we're mining that, and here's this information in a way that is actually effective for you and will help you sell and close better. Salespeople, we're lazy people. We want to get paid, make the most money doing the least we can. So when we can pull all the information from the tools and hand it back to them and say, here's a guide for you, this should help you, that makes a huge impact. And that's something we're playing around with right now. But we've got stuff everywhere, like every other company.
Yeah, that was a big tech stack. That's just for sales. So don't even start with marketing, whatever they got.
Yeah, there's more.
And I totally get that. In the process of trying to figure all that out, something like, if I could know that these companies are about to raise capital, and they always put stuff out about that, they can tell me who I should be talking to, who's been involved in it, when it's happening, how much is it, what they're doing with it, right? There's so much you can gather. And if I could know that, the earlier I could know that, the more I could start to build champions, relationships, influence in that decision to help them through the other side of those things.
Even more importantly, you can become an authority to that customer.
Exactly.
Because what salespeople don't always do really well, the average salesperson definitely doesn't do well, is prepare for the meeting. They're like, oh, I've done discovery calls 100 times. I don't need to prepare for this call. Well, that's BS. You should prepare for every call like it's your next $1 million account, right? And going in with that in your back pocket, knowing those things, being prepared like that, it's a game changer for salespeople.
I saw it in my own sales career. When I started doing more research, I was much more of a whale hunter than trying to fish in the harbor to get a bunch of fish. I'd spend a lot of time doing research. So the time I walk in, or the first time I open my mouth with the client was, hey, oh, you're with such and such. You guys have been wrestling with this. How did you solve that? And it would just completely change the dynamic
Yeah.
just by me being a little bit more prepared. It really does make a big difference when you actually do a little more, moving that needle a little bit farther.
The tools are as much of a distraction, by the way, for the leadership team. How do I manage my team? Again, we've got so much information right now. There's dashboards in Clary, there's dashboards in Salesforce and HighSpot, and we've got a data lake with Looker and myriads of dashboards there and spreadsheets. At the end of the day, how do I manage my team?
That's a good
And
question, because I'll tell you the way, and this might be a separate conversation we can do later, but the way AI is evolving, people are really asking the same question. But how many tools should I continue? I'm paying for SaaS, I'm paying for credits, right? But still, I'm not getting this simple answer. But how do I effectively manage my team? And is there one place where we can go and talk about? So maybe where I'm leading towards is a modern revenue stack is really more of AI native dashboard, right? See, we moved dashboards from being static reports, representation of reports, to slicing, dicing dashboards using Looker or Tableau. And now we are moving into more of an interactive dashboard with AI or Gen AI, where I can now slice, not just slice and dice, but ask questions, and based on my all enterprise context, it will give me an answer. I believe that is ultimately where we are going, is what I feel how this revenue stack is evolving.
absolutely. As an example, I talked earlier about how qualified is a deal? Is a deal real or not? And one of the things that I'm working with our sales leadership team is deep inspections, going into a deal and understanding where this deal is at. Not just when we're doing forecast calls, the update where we're at right now. We've got to move beyond feelings. And when you can use an agentic AI tool and go in and pull all this data back for the manager and say, here's how we see this deal based on our standards of how we're measuring a deal, it's a total game changer. We're not quite there yet. The challenge we have with doing that, you can't use external tools, because now I'm taking customer data and putting it out on Claude or Chat GPT. You can't do that. So how do you get that information? So you've got to have the tools internal. So IT is going to play a big role in this, but I think most vendors are going to be pushing their IT teams to the brink from a compliance perspective, because what you can do with it today is mind-boggling. And the people that aren't using AI in sales, either as a salesperson or as a sales leader, they're not going to be effective going forward.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You're using AI to help you reach things, reach the salesperson and get them moving, help them fine-tune their actions, right? By giving them what they need to move. But also, how are you giving those frontline managers the capacity to be able to help?
Yeah.
And see what's going on and navigate towards better sales behaviors, because not every manager does the same. And so that critical frontline behavior makes such a difference, because ultimately you're on the sales field.
And it's the hardest job in the world. You've got all the pressure from the top and all the noise from the bottom. That is the hardest job. And the problem I always have, if you ask your frontline sales manager, I need you to start doing this, what are you going to take away from them? Because they already can't do it. So you've got to make them more effective somehow. There's a limit for them. There's a capacity limit.
And Jay used to say it. He was a technical architect, and he was like, oh, I should get into sales. That should be easy. He was like, okay, that was the hardest 3 years of your life, he said? Something like that.
Hardest job since I moved, man. Once you're in sales, you cannot get out of sales, right? That is the problem with it.
Then he became CEO and started his own business. And now it's like sales plus, right?
The way I see it, everybody in the company should be in sales.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We are all in sales.
Chuck, this has been really such a pleasure, and love your wisdom and the way you think about helping the front line change their lives and change the lives of their clients. And so we just thank you for coming on. And for those of you watching, thank you for hanging out with us for this episode. And please like and subscribe, share with your friends, share on LinkedIn, send it around. We'd love for you to spread the word about how to build revenue management engines that work. So we'll see you on the next episode, and take care.